welcome. This is a very exciting morning and afternoon. There are two wonderful people I'd like to welcome this morning. Will Crutchfield, who has really made his mark in the world of music and made that unbelievable transition from critic to conductor. Will has taught here at Juilliard. He is certainly one of the most knowledgeable people we have about voice and singing technique, and a real authority on bel canto. Also, he is now the opera director at the Caramore Festival, and we are really thrilled to have Will Crutchfield with us today. The other person, if I started going into the long list of achievements, it would be just impossible to finish even by midnight. She is my very, very dear friend. We've had the unique possibility to sing some marvelous things together, to create a little bit of stir in the world, and to remain dear, dear friends. And what can I say? I mean, this is truly one of the great ladies of the world, but no question, one of the greatest voices, not of just this century, but of all time. One of the greatest singers, the great JOAN Sutherland.
Ahead of us of talk about vocal technique with two singers who know what they're talking about in terms of vocal technique. And I'm just here to keep things hopping from topic to topic and prompt them with questions. So the first question is this. Dame JOAN Sutherland began her career singing lowish soprano music and even some mezzo-soprano music, and gradually trained and reoriented the voice upwards. Marilyn Horne began singing a mix of soprano and mezzo-soprano music and gradually reoriented her repertoire downwards. So my question for each of you is, how does a young singer determine what's the most favorable range to be working in? And is it a matter of nature and you have to discover that nature, or is it a matter of choice? Shall we start with Dame JOAN?
Well, I think probably I was working very much in the middle of the voice and trying to get an even line throughout such a range as I thought I had. I think that the higher register of the voice was there, but I was too afraid to use it. And I don't know, I think that you have to wait until you see how you mature, how the voice accepts what it is doing. And I think it's very dangerous for young singers to sing too heavy roles too soon. I had that fault, but I was always able to sing lightly in the house, in the upper register, but it was a matter of working and finding out, I think, by doing scales and exercises and realizing, along with my husband listening to me, you need someone to listen to you, I think, as well. And he said, you know, you've got the high voice there, why don't you work to use it? And it wasn't a matter of forcing the voice or straining, but doing gentle work and actually trying to bridge the gap between that more middle register and the upper register. I think that you have to use caution about moving from one position to another, one thinking you're a mezzo and becoming a coloratura soprano, or in Jackie's case, being a soprano and then exploring the lower register. I think it's something you have to sense yourself. I don't think it just happens. You have to work on it, but you have to feel where the real centre of your voice is, don't you?
Over to
Well, I think sometimes we are really lucky if certain accidents happen to us too. It's singing and life are very strange at times, but there are certain guide rules that one has to respect down through the ages, and Joan just mentioned a couple of them, which was, you know, mainly not to sing heavy rolls too soon. Now, that being said, I absolutely agree, but I'm one of the victims who did not. I can't say victim because I didn't hurt myself.
Likewise.
Doing these heavy rolls when I was quite young. But this is the main thing that I have to say, and that is that you really must, and I say must, get your technique solidly working before you embark on a career, because there are several things that'll happen. You will keep dealing with the problems that you have vocally. You will keep magnifying them, and they won't get better, because you'll constantly be in front of the public trying to produce and obviously be successful. The other thing is that you really should know that once the technique is solid, all of the other stuff will go so much faster. It will fall into place, and you will go to auditions and you will be hired. A lot of people just keep slugging it out and going to audition after audition, and not being hired very much of the time. And that's really important to remember. I'm just digressing a little bit, but I have to say that I started so young as a singer, and I know Joan sang also when she was very young, that, I mean, there's no question about being a mezzo, you know, when you're 5 years old. And because I had the easy extension on the top and just kept singing in that register, so it was just assumed that I was a soprano. And I also have always had this certain brightness to my voice. And when the chest register arrived, and I will say arrived, because I did nothing to gain it. This sounds pretty easy, I know, but in fact it was. But I was singing all the time as a soprano. But around the age of 15, when puberty, you know, is just going wild, you know, non so più cosa son, cosa faccio. I just suddenly had an entire, you know, 8 notes, 6 to 8 notes on the bottom of my voice. They just were there, but I didn't use them. I just would sort of fool around with them and, sing them still in a very soprano way and everything.
Well,
so,
that's what I was doing with the top. Fooling around. So my husband said, aha.
all things come to those who wait.
So, but the main thing is when the decision-making time comes, when you're in your late 20s, and you really have to. Would you say late 20s is about the time, Joan?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mid-20s.
Right, mid to late 20s, and you really have to start to decide. Well, because of opera, this has nothing to do with recital singing. Recital singing, basically, you can sing things in the keys you want to sing them in, and one should always be comfortable in this kind of singing. We'd like you to be comfortable all the time, but then that's when you really have to decide, and there are a few rules, like, am I comfortable singing this way for many hours and not feeling tired, not feeling like my strength has eroded, like my vocal cords are starting to feel raw? That's a very big thing. So we get to the question of tessitura, which we know that means where the general part lies. And if you cannot sustain that easily, then you've got to really decide, should I go up, should I go down? What's the problem with this, sustaining this tessitura? And there's where the line can be very fine, and especially, I would say, with mezzo-sopranos and sopranos. It's very, very difficult to decide exactly where to go.
There's grist for about 20 more topics in the answers you've already given. Let me pluck one out. Both of you, each of you has just identified yourselves as one who did the supposedly dangerous thing of singing heavy roles early on, and yet you survived. Let me be a bit of a devil's advocate and point out that, for instance, Caruso and Björling and Domingo all sang Pagliacci as very young men, and they also survived. And Friedrich Schor made his debut as Wotan, and Rosa Pansel sang Forza del Destino at the Met at the age of 20 or short, a little bit after 20. Shouldn't we maybe ask a question? Is it so wrong? Mightn't it be the case that if a singer is right for heavy roles, they're going to be so from the beginning, and if they're not right for them, then waiting won't help?
Well, while they're waiting, they should, as Jackie said, be working on their technique, because I think today far too many young singers are out there in front of audiences doing it before they're actually in control of a basic technique. They don't. I've done a lot of competitions since I retired. I've done a lot of adjudicating, and one of my big beefs is that they don't basically know how to breathe and support the breath and project the sound. It's a very basic thing. That is singing. Breathe, support, project. Breathe, support, project. And this has to be in one motion and tied in to a wonderful legato line from the bottom to the top of the voice and back again. And they should work. Students must work on these things and sing vocalies. So if they're doing arias, use their arias as vocalies. But one hears such straggly singing, such unfocused singing, such wild singing. They're not in control of what they're doing. They don't prepare the sound before they emit it. There's this awful thing of taking a breath and going, bah! And they haven't really thought. That is a phrase that goes from here to here and back to here and down to here and back again to where I started, maybe.
Okay, well, let's pursue that for a second. No, sorry, I want to... you said so many things in there that I would love to get put on the table in a specific way. The idea of breathe, sing, project, breathe, sing, project...
Breathe, support.
Support.
That's the trouble.
How specific can you be about meaning that it's one continuous motion? The intake of the breath and the initiation and supporting of the tone?
Well, there's a funny old thing that I always go back to, which is the happy surprise. And if you go, then your breath is supported, your throat is open, and you can project the sound to the front of the hard palate. It's easy. Absolutely easy. There's one notion.
I've always said this too, that breathing gets to too much of a magical kind of connotation. Breathing is easy if you do it right. Breath support is easy if you do it right. And it's a very simple step. There are like two, breathe, support, sing, And I think that I've often said I can teach somebody to properly support the voice in 5 minutes.
But do they remember to do it?
That's the biggie. That's the biggie.
Is that simply the discipline of practice and repetition?
Of course, sure. And you have to have it so much as part of your body that you're not thinking about that when you're out there singing all these big roles. You don't have to think about that. That's probably the reason so many people get so nervous about performances.
And occasionally, you know, you just have to will yourself to do it. It may not be a day that you're feeling so great, you know, and you just say,
Feel flabby.
you know, and you just have to really, you know, just use all of your bodily strength that you have, bodily, to just keep this whole anchor really supporting all of this so that it's free. I think of this also as like a wheel. That in goes the air, out comes the sound. In, you know.
Similar to what Joan
I
just
say
said
in
about a
goes the
continuous
air,
gesture.
out comes the sound. In goes the air. And not too much air, because then you can't control it. You have to know how much breath to take.
And the other thing is that you have to, once you have made this motion, is you must start the air flowing, because oftentimes singers will take the breath and then trap the air and think that they are supporting. Instead, what they're doing is trapping the air. So it's that constant motion of this wheel.
But they don't want to let the air go out with the sound. They have to control the breath and not allow all the breath to escape with the sound. They have to have that feeling of, and the support coming from down there, and the voice sitting on the breath like a ping pong ball. Really. And then they can speak, sing, do what they please, and slowly this compressed air that they've created by that breath and support will slowly go down, and then they must breathe again. But it's always a matter really of topping up for the most part.
And you know, all those pictures that we've seen of the singers of old who have stood at the lesson with the candle in front of them, they're not there for nothing. These people knew about singing, and that really is still a very good method.
Or a mirror,
right.
So that it doesn't...
The business of the candle is to sing without blowing out the candle, which would indicate an uncontrolled puff of breath.
Right, and actually not getting that flame to flicker too much.
What is an open throat, and what role does that play? Who wants to start?
Well, I think that the open throat is, again, a very tricky term, because we don't want singers to sing, as we say, in the throat. We don't want them to sing with the throaty sound, because
singing back in the throat.
Oftentimes, well, most of the time, it sounds so much better to the singer himself or herself when they're singing throatily. They just feel the sound much, much better themselves. But unfortunately, the audience doesn't feel the sound. That's the biggie. And of course, the other thing is when you're singing your throat, you have this wonderful control. You just feel like, oh, I've got my hands on it. Nobody's ever going to let it be released. So I can control everything. Unfortunately, you really have to feel the sound going, and you can't hear it that well yourself.
So what in the affirmative sense is an open throat? What is
I think
properly
the
freedom.
Yeah,
Freedom. Absolute relaxation. Don't
And
feel
also,
anything.
Also,
Nothing.
the back of the mouth, back by the palate. That's where you have to sometimes start lifting and opening up there to allow for space, especially as you crescendo things. And
consciously raising the soft palate.
right.
Yes.
Right.
Breathe. Think of the happy surprise when it happens.
Good. It's exactly the same things.
And there it is. And that's it. You just sing on that, and you project everything through here. And you don't hang on with your throat, and you don't breathe from here. You really breathe from, well, I always say from the pelvis practically, because if the diaphragm is acting properly, then it is really held in place by muscles which go down into the pelvis, and you have that feeling of a solid base from the tops of your legs to here. In fact, I say to the eyes, because they're very important too. You breathe, you have that deep breath from the bottom of the lungs, slowly feeling the air becomes sort of compressed, and you let that compressed air go out very slowly. But you have the feeling of the air going really right up into the head. It's nonsense in a way, but in another way, you need that. You need the resonance here. You need to use these resonances to project the sound. And some people, I don't know, they sort of stand with their shoulders up and their chins down, and they're cutting off that flow of air and that flow really of sound.
I think what we can say is that Joan and I are agreed that breath support is the basis of all singing. Make no mistake about it. If somebody says to you, you don't need to worry about your breath support, exit immediately.
I've heard a person, a contestant in a competition say, my teacher says the breathing will take care of itself. I said, what?
I asked Carlo Bergonzi not too long ago, you know, he is in his 70s and he's still singing, and I said to him, more than the fact that he's still singing, because anybody who sings that well can still sing in the 70s for sure, but obviously the question I asked him was, how do you manage to still sing so well and not sing so often? Because a singer, you know, keeps all these muscles toned up and all the body muscles toned up. And I said, how do you manage to keep your voice in shape? And he said, I do breathing exercises every morning. So there you are.
Does either of you attach importance to the intake of breath being quiet as a way to sort of monitor whether the throat is relaxed?
No. I think sometimes you have to take the air in so fast.
If you're singing coloratura, you certainly have to. You haven't got time to sort of think, oh, I'm breathing from down here. You do definitely have to take mouth breaths sometimes. But we don't want noisy breathing. We don't want noisy attacks. I shouldn't use the word attack, but noisy commencements to phrases, especially with vowels and a great rush of air coming out and aspirating. It is this. It's a very fine line of control.
Why is the moment of attack and the moment of release often a difficulty for singers?
Because they don't prepare it in their mind first. You have to think, I think I said before, you have to think of the phrase you are going to sing, and you have to know where that note is. You don't have to sort of come to it and think, now, oh yes, it's a G, now I'm all right. But you've got to be bang on that note. You can't scoop up to it and you can't slide down to it. I have been accused of scooping, and part of it is really interpretive, singing all these crazy women. You want to get a morbid feeling to it, so there is often this use of a.
But that falls into expression.
That falls into expression and portamento, but we don't want portamenti all the time, or great sort of dein ist mein ganzes Herz. All the time.
That's schmaltz.
Should we distinguish between scooping and portamento? I mean, in other words,
hard to do.
It's very hard to do.
Very hard to distinguish between the two.
Well, I mean,
let me offer you a try and see if you think.
What?
Let me offer you a try and see if you can buy this. A scoop is an uncoordinated approximation of a pitch onto which you then settle.
That's right.
And a portamento is a conscious, smooth motion of the voice from one intentionally achieved pitch to another intentionally
That's right,
achieved.
but you should also be able to do that just with the pure legato line.
Can you demonstrate that?
Are you serious?
Serious, yes, because I think it's very difficult to tell the difference.
Too much portamento.
Well,
Now let's hear a scoop. That's still schmaltz. Okay, all right, I'll buy that.
No, but seriously, here's the point. When, in the generation in which you both were training, very few singers, especially in the English-speaking world, had any concept of the proper use of portamento, and both of you did.
We read.
Why? How did you get that?
We read books, we read treatises, we did vocales, we learned about the bel canto period, how the music was interpreted, what the use of appoggiatura, portamento, and I think sometimes students today maybe don't read some of the wonderful literature that is around to help them.
And you know, I remember also that I read these things with great interest. It was not a question like, oh, I must do this. I was anxious to get my hands on anything that could inform me about it or anything that I could learn. And so this was really basically almost my leisure reading.
So you were fascinated to find out in a historical sense almost
Absolutely.
how people had sung.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And you encountered the idea of portamento in that? Or did teachers also teach it to you?
Back to portamento, well, I'm sort of on to the literature in a way. But as has been said often, my mother was a singer and had a very fine teacher, and she, of course, studied all the works of Garcia, Marchesi, Concone, Giordano, Vaccai, you name them, did all these wonderful vocales. But along with doing the vocales, they incorporated all the bel canto style. And the use of the portamento, the use of the Messa di voce, the use of piano, thank you very much, and pianissimo, and the use of injecting the nuance into the sound.
So you had somebody at home that you were listening to who was doing the right thing.
That's right, and then I also had a husband who made me do the right thing.
It was sort of similar.
Yeah.
Except it was father instead of mother.
Yes, well, it was. You see, I think that a lot of the young students today miss a lot because there's so much going on around them. We had no television, barely had radio. We didn't have much money. We made simple amusement within the family, in the home, and we sang. We played. Somebody had a violin, and we used to have little do's, little evenings, and we had an opportunity to use our voices or our ability, musical ability. Nowadays, there is so many distractions, and I wonder whether maybe we got off to a flying start because of those family do's.
That I agree with all of that, but let's face it, we cannot get people to give up their televisions. I don't want to give up mine. We cannot get them to give up their computers, emails, all this kind of thing. And all of these things that we have, not to mention, CDs, whatever your LPs, radio. But I think the big thing to do is to somehow a study has to be made of the student, and I really think it has to emanate from the student himself, because the student has to have the will, the desire, the want, whatever you want to call it, to seek out these books and to also seek out records, recordings of singers who really did it right. And you have to be able to listen to these things. Unfortunately, I find that too many singers today don't go beyond what's available today instead of going way back to what is available from the past.
Darling, some of them don't even seem to remember Tebaldi, and let alone going back any further, which is shocking.
I had an opera class once, and I asked how many of them were interested in historical recordings of singers, and just two raised their hands even then, and I asked those two what historical singers in particular, Tebaldi and Callas.
Well, the thing is also that I I think probably most everyone knows that a lot of these historical recordings have now been remastered, and that you can really get a sense of what these voices sounded like. We were sort of listening like this and saying, now what's behind that awful recording?
Yeah, and sort of scratching and creaking, because they were sort of old records as well as being recorded.
And I think we also could not get a sense of the size of the voices.
No.
So now with these remasterings, you must have heard a lot of them, Will.
Sure, it's much easier to do that. They found a way to take out a lot of the extraneous sound selectively.
Right, right. And then, you know, I don't want to change the subject, but I want to move into it's not all technique. I want to move into the fact that you also have to be born with this innate sense of what it is to sing, to express, to say something with your voice. You have to have all of this to go with it, because there are people who have voices who can't sing in the best sense of the word.
I think when I say you breathe to the eyes, it's also a case of feeling that there's a certain exaltation about singing. There's an excitement, there's a thrill of being able to spin that sound out there. Let the audience enjoy it. Don't just keep it to yourself. It has to have a certain abandon, a controlled abandon. But as Jackie said, you have to really project and inspire the audience with the colour of the voice, the timbre, the expression that you can give it, the feeling that you can put into those notes that are written down there, which the composer, as a rule, has given very firm instructions. And if you read the music, and the notation and the I tell you, it's terrible to get old, isn't it? but you have to really study the music and interpret according to what is written there.
Let me bring both of you back to the topic of early training, because both of you sang from a very young age. I sometimes have the impression that in the vast majority of cases, singers who develop a good technique are those who had early childhood musical training, whether as singers or in some instrument or some other way.
Well, certainly we have a lot of cases that it was, you know, if we talked to even some of our contemporary singers, our peers, people we've sung with, a lot of them started singing as children. Males as well as females, but especially the females.
And how about background in other branches of music?
Lots started on the piano or other instruments, there's no question about that. I always say I think it's a better system, the best system of all is to start early and play the piano.
Yeah.
And then maybe start, if you want to start to sing, then maybe after puberty has set in, you know, maybe.
Well, I sang, but I mean, I wasn't studying when I was a child. I mean, what my mother did rubbed off, as it were. I mean, she always vowed she never taught me, but I learned a lot from watching and listening to her, and it's something that I could do myself, because I hated singing in church, because when I sang, people turned around and looked at me, so I sort of squeaked away in church and sang in a little voice like this, and Mother would go, "Sing out, sing out." She said, you do yourself a lot of harm singing down like that, and then in fact she's right.
Well, in my case, I did start early. I had my very first formal lessons at 5. And, but again, this is what you really have to, you need somebody who is watching over what's happening to you, too. My father was very much aware of how I was being trained, and his famous watchword was, "I'm not going to let anybody touch that natural placement of hers." So, you know, what can I say? But I did learn the basics of support at around 7 or 8.
Me too.
Had a wonderful teacher in Bradford, Pennsylvania. That's my other watchword. You never know from where a great teacher is coming or a great talent. They can just come out of anywhere. And but, you know, luckily, as I said, I had him looking over my shoulder. I think he didn't want to really formally teach me because he thought it was a little too close, the family, you know, giving lessons and all that, but that was his choice. And maybe also because I was a female and he felt that he needed a female to teach me.
Is that often the most advantageous combination, a teacher and a pupil in the same voice category?
Not necessarily. It really isn't. It can work either way, really. I would say that in my case, I feel a little, you know, a little bit closer to working with a female. Sure, there's no question.
Yes, me too.
But certainly it can work either way. I had a wonderful male teacher all through college at the University of Southern California.
Let's go back to the topic that you brought up just a bit earlier. One sometimes finds a young singer who is able spontaneously to produce a sort of a raw, rough chest voice that is loud. How does the teacher get from that to the malleable kind that the two of you
I
are
think
going
what you have to do is you have to do a series of exercises that take you from your upper middle voice, your head voice, gradually down into the lower voice, crescendoing, coming back up on the same exercise and decreasing the amount of resonance that has come in at the bottom, back up to the head voice, and keep going down the scale. Keep, you know, as if you were going, leaving all of that, what we call weight of the chest resonance down there, and just gradually taking it out as you go back up. I think these exercises have to be really worked to get it all homogenized.
And when you speak of that, I mean, what you just demonstrated here is starting with something that is light, descending and giving it a crescendo that brings in the chest element, and then sort of confirming your own control over that by reducing it again.
That was all done on air, by the way.
Does this relate to the even more basic idea of the messa di voce on a single note?
It's part of it, I think.
What role does that play for each of you?
Well, the messa di voce, first of all, is a term that a lot of people don't even know. I mean, I have to tell this story. Oh, I can't tell the name, but it would be heaven to. I sat with a very famous Italian mezzo-soprano in Chicago about 30 years ago at a dinner, and the term, I don't know how it came up, I said something about messa di voce. And this lady said, that term doesn't even exist in Italian. And I went, whoops, have I done something wrong? Is this something, you know, I said, but it's in all the books of Garcia. And, no, that absolutely, there's no such thing. So.
Well, the such thing that, thank goodness, there still is, that messa di voce comes from mettere, to place or to put the voice, and it's come to be used in Italian vocal training over the centuries as to begin a note softly, swell it out to forte, and return it to the initial softness, and with the caveat that it ought to stay steadily on pitch, and the crescendo should be smooth, and the diminuendo also, and nothing should be sudden or jerky, etc., etc., etc. And it's much easier described than done, but did both of you have that as part of your early?
You bet, and I even had it without knowing what I was doing. From something innate, again, these heavy roles that I was singing in my early 20s, I somehow knew that if I would attack, say a high C, if I would attack it softly and then put the air on it, it was safer, or it felt better, or I got better results, or whatever. That's what I was doing.
And was it also part of your lessons before you were in your career?
Yes, absolutely.
Definitely.
And how do you account for its near absence in most teaching?
I don't know. I'm new at that game.
I must say that I know, I work with a lot of young singers, obviously, and I know rather few of them that have any regular habit of trying to attain this particular thing. And yet we have centuries of writers saying that it's the basis of everything else.
Well, I mean, I used to do an exercise that was sort of me-a-o, and it used to swell on the note and then take it back again. But all on one note, and having taken a decent breath, I don't know, one did learn to do it. And do it just on single notes as well.
You have to, also, you've got to get mental pictures, you know. You have to get mental pictures of what you want. You want to, sort of how you want the voice to, the sound to go out, how you want the air to start. It's got to be all in your head. Good old Dad, he said, singing was 97% brains. I don't know where he came up with that. You know, but I mean, somehow he learned it and learned it as the gospel, and I think he was right. In the end, it really is the head. We know an awful lot of fabulous talents that we finally said, well, you know, she just hasn't got it upstairs. She can't put it together in the head.
How about coloratura agility, which is something that obviously both of you were a part of the revival of that after a period when not so many singers concentrated on it. Is that also something that you must learn in youth, or is it something that people can master when they're already in their 20s?
I'd swing towards the youth.
Me too.
I don't know too many people that have mastered it when they're full-blown singers.
Me either.
Again, you know, this is this mental picture. This is the kind of thing that somehow the mental picture of how those notes look on the page, how they should come out of your throat and everything is something that just, you know, you have to think about.
And do you think that has anything to do with early musical education in the sense of just being used to what a lot of 16th notes are and what they sound like, and perhaps learning them in scales?
You really do have to learn to divide them up into sort of groups of 4 or groups of 6 or whatever they are, and they have to be right spot on. And you have to work on them to keep them within the bounds of the measure of the bars.
Absolutely.
You just have to work
hard
at
work.
it. I mean, one worked at every role one did. One divided up the runs into sections and just worked at them over and over and over again.
I don't know about you, Joan, but I mean, I certainly can learn anything by ear if I have to, and I did very much as a child, but when I have to learn some very, very difficult runs or something like that, cadenza, I have to see it. I have to see it on the page and figure it out and just see where all those notes are and exactly how I'm going to work them out.
You have to. You can't just slur over them. And if people are going to sing these big sort of coloratura roles, then all those notes have to be absolutely accurate. Once heard performances of Traviata with the runs in that just slaughtered and skated over. It's monstrous.
Did you have the sense when you were developing as singers of that being an unusual attitude, the attitude you've just expressed? I mean, thanks partly to you too, it's rather more usual now, but I should think it would have been a little eccentric.
What's the point of singing? You mean just singing the coloratura or singing?
There's always Traviata and Trovatore.
That's true. That's true.
Well, they could be forgiven a lot. Because where are they today? Or people like them?
Yes. How about the
Well, and we should say, though, that at that point, also an awful lot of caballettas got cut.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Where all the fast notes got going. They were cut in those days.
How about the trill? How does one learn and or teach that if the singer doesn't have it spontaneously?
Well, I mean, I taught myself to trill. I think Joan taught herself to trill. It's just, you know, figuring it out. But I always will say is to take 2 notes and take a half step and you start them swinging. Slowly, slowly, and then start swinging those vocal cords. And then you take the whole note trill, and the same thing, and take those two notes and start slowly, and then just try to sing faster and get them vibrating. I don't know of any other way
That's
to teach
the way
it.
to do it. But I always think that it also brings into play a quick undulation of the soft palate, and that the breath is against the soft palate, and that is where the feeling of the trill goes, not particularly on the vocal cords.
That it
Please.
flutters.
Yes.
Does one get over the dividing line between singing two notes separately but quickly and the kind of free motion of the trill by getting faster and faster until you're up to that point, or by letting something happen that is different from just singing the two notes?
Well, it certainly comes to the stage where it just flips. It's like singing the akuti. I always say that I project the sound forward for the most of the range of the voice. But when it comes to C sharp D, E flat E, the voice, instead of being projected here, suddenly goes out the back of the top of the head, and it's projected to the back of the hard palate. So those notes, I learned quite soon that the way those notes remained secure was this sort of flip from singing forward all the time. And when you got to the and that to me is pure head voice. That is what head voice is.
And you feel something similar with the trill, letting it flip in that way?
Yes, to me, it always feels that it's the soft palate is doing this, is fluttering, they're the two notes going back and forward, fast, very fast.
And then there's also that sometimes you have to
Don't try it and choke.
hit it. Sometimes you have to hit a trill quickly. You know, you have to go like that. You know, so what you have to do, you have to by then have known that these notes can swing together, and you just got to give it a shot of air. You know, music, that kind of thing. I often
So it's a muscle memory that has been developed.
Oh yeah, muscle memory is real big stuff in all of this.
Do you have opinions, either of you, about what vowels are?
Wait a second, I want to ask you some muscle memory.
Yes.
What is muscle memory, though?
I don't want to hear about it.
Is it okay if I answer this?
Yeah, I'm interested.
The muscle memory, I mean, to me, it just means that the muscles become accustomed to an action that they've been disciplined to make.
Right, but it's still your head. Your head is giving
sure,
the signal.
for sure,
It's all still coming from the head. The head has learned this so well that it's giving the signal that the muscles know exactly what to do.
I always...
What muscles?
Something's happening here when you do those things.
I never felt anything.
Joan and I have been through this before.
I just get back to that good old breathe, support and project. I mean, leave the vocal cords alone. Don't mention them. I'm talking to you. I'm not thinking about my vocal cords, except that I've got a stinking cold and I don't know that I last the day out. But you have to have that freedom around here. It's here that the support comes from. It's from the body. The body is like a plinth, and the sound is you throw the sound away once you've learned how to.
Okay, but
That's
your muscle memory is also coming from your head that tells your muscles of your diaphragm and your pelvis and all of this. You're giving the signals.
Yeah, well, that's all the muscle memory I want to know about. I don't want to know about around the vocal cords, the pharynx, the larynx, the glottis, anything. Thank you.
The extraordinary thing about learning to sing, as opposed to any other musical discipline, is that, as I think it was Rameau who said this, the transformations of the larynx are not at our disposal. By which
Who said that?
Rameau, There are muscles and they are doing things, but we can't work them directly. We can't, the brain is sending signals that in effect...
It's a reflex, like speaking.
Yes, exactly.
But
Because we can't tell the vocal cords, assume the position for C sharp. We have to think of a C sharp and sing it, and then they do it.
The head
if you do, set up a trill or something like that, and if you do put your hand slightly here, you will definitely feel vibrations.
Oh yes,
happening.
you will.
That's for sure.
So
I think that's the vocal cords vibrating, kids.
It's the voice box jiggling. That's
Yeah.
what Garcia is.
The air is passing over.
Yeah, both of you have attached importance to the name of Garcia. Say some more about that, would you please?
Well, Garcia, the daddy Garcia was the great singer, Manuel Garcia the First, who sang, he was the original Alma Viva in Barbara Seville. He had the great Otello of Rossini written for him. A lot of people have said that maybe he wasn't really a tenor, that maybe he was a baritone, but we know him as a tenor. And then his two very famous daughters were Maria Malibran Garcia and Pauline Viardo Garcia, who were arguably two of the greatest singers of the last century and certainly of all time. But his son, then, Manuel Garcia II, became the great voice teacher. And he obviously took the principles from his father and ran with them, and the basis sort of all vocal technique falls on his shoulders.
I think it's fair to say that he was the first to codify traditional Italian vocal technique and try to describe some of it in scientific terms.
And write it all down.
With pictures.
Right. And then because he was so curious to see, pardon the expression, the vocal cords, he invented the laryngoscope, the famous mirror that gets stuck down the back of your throat, which is now practically done away with because of technology. Now they just put that gun in there and look at the television. But the laryngoscope was his invention, so he could see.
Before we started, Dame Joan, you were talking of a book of reminiscences of someone who studied with Garcia.
That's right. It was Herman Klein, whose parents took Garcia into their home when he came to London, and Herman Klein apparently sat in at many of Garcia's lessons and actually worked with him as well. He published a little leaflet back in 1923 I think it was called The Bel Canto with special reference to the singing of Mozart or something. It's about 50 pages, and I have an old copy from that period. But this treatise was reprinted in a book in 1990 called Herman Klein and the Gramophone, and those 50 pages are in the front of that book. I would advise any student to read and inwardly digest as much of it as they possibly can, because there's a great deal of common sense in the book, and it does explain a lot of things, as to what is required to have a beautiful voice and get up and make a professional career. There was another book, which Jackie knows also, called Vocal Wisdom, which is things that are taken down from the teaching of Lamperti. And that is available also in America. I think it's Taplinger is the publisher. It's about, $8 or $9, I think. But these books are terribly interesting. I find them interesting, and I find myself reading them and nodding and thinking, yes, that's about it. That's someone, I did that sort of instinctively, or else I was taught to do it one thing or the other. You have to be able to understand what they're getting at, but it basically is very simple, and there's a wealth of instruction in those two little books.
And didn't you also say, Will, that Garcia's book actually is easier to get now?
Yes,
Yes,
the
on
big
singing.
Garcia book. Well, there are several versions. He himself made an abridgment, a very short abridgment of it into English that's called Hints on Singing, and that is reprinted, I think, by Padelson's itself. I mean, I think the store has also made the reprint. And then there's the big book from which that was reduced, and that has now been translated into English and is published by, I want to say Garland, but I'm not sure that's right.
Is it true, I'm going to ask you because Will is the fountain of knowledge of all this, that Garcia's fame came from teaching Jenny Lind how to sing again? His real reputation.
That was certainly one of the things that made
The famous thing that Jenny Lind had been a great prima donna of Scandinavia, very, very famous and highly paid, and then she lost her voice, and she went to Garcia, and there's the famous phrase that they still argue about whether he said, Madame, vous n'avez pas de voix, or Madame, vous n'avez plus de voix. And then the famous, the treatment that we all read about was that he made her not speak for a period of time, like 6 weeks or something like that. She could not even speak. She had to totally rest her voice. And then he started teaching her painstakingly from the bottom up again, and then she became the great Jenny Lind that we all knew. But I thought that she's the one who really established his fame, saying that a voice teacher also needs to have some real big talent come through the door.
doesn't hurt.
I remember a story that my great accompanist, Gwendolyn Kaldowski, had. Gwendolyn was my teacher and my accompanist for at least 10 years when I started singing recitals. Her aunt, Florianne Brimson, isn't that a great name, sang with Melba when Melba toured, with her own company in this country, singing Faust and Romeo and Juliet and all her great roles. And Florianne was always singing Siebel or Stefano or something like that. Anyway, they all studied with Marchesi. Now, Madame Marchesi and her husband were also disciples of Garcia and studied with him. And the great story is that she kept saying to her husband, we just need one great voice to come through the door. And then one day she ran up to his studio and said, she's here. And it was Melba. And that made her studio.
Well, they also taught Sybil Sanderson too.
Oh, lots of
Sybil
others.
Sanderson,
lots of
Emma
others.
Calvé,
That's right.
Frances Alda, a good list. Good list. Emma Eames.
Yeah, I was just saying.
This business of lineage from teacher to pupil to second generation pupil is always fascinating to people who study the history of voice, but it can sometimes be misleading. I mean, any of us who teach dread being judged on the students who haven't listened,
I think it's also important to say, though, that every voice has pretty much its own path. We can lay down the rules and say these rules must be followed, and I think that pretty much we should stick to all those rules, just like a pianist would who's starting out learning to play the piano. But I think certain voices mature faster, certain voice categories mature younger, so we have to not just say, oh, well, you're 25, you're over the hill.
Oh, no.
So, but then again, we also have to listen carefully if the 30-year-old is going to really start it soon, or if the 30-year-old maybe is going to miss the boat. It's very, very tricky to judge that, but we should never say, well, my friend is here, I should be there too. No, very, very different kinds.
Something we want to hear too is the individual characteristic of a voice. There are so many voices that sound pretty much all the same, but it's wonderful to hear a young voice that has a distinctive quality, a distinctive sound, something that you hear them singing, that's so-and-so, as it has been with Callas, or let's not Let's not ape the way other people sing. Let's not try and copy the way people sing. Young singers should develop their own particular sound. And very often they'll find that they've got this distinctive quality.
And do you two feel, as some of us do, I think that sometimes that individual quality is something that, if it went a little farther, it would almost be a fault. But having just the right amount of it gives an individuality to the voice that colors it.
Well, it's mostly the actual timbre, I think. I'm not talking about the interpretive ability of a voice or how they use the voice, but just the actual sound they make.
I'm thinking of, let's say, Tito Gobbi, for instance. I mean, a very particular color to that voice that strikes some ears as ugly, even. And yet, if you kind of get into it, it seems so beautiful.
The whole package was so great. The expression that he brought to it. And that's, of course, that's the other end of the spectrum. The expression has to be just as strong as the vocal talent. We have to bring them together and have them meet in the middle. And frankly, that's what's so difficult about plain old bel canto music, is singing all of those difficult roulades and runs and everything else, but making them be expressive.
Which they can be.
Which they're clearly written to be.
Yes.
Let me ask the two of you a question about range that I've been very curious to hear your thoughts on. I think it's right to say that up to about the Second World War, there were more typically sort of big-voiced sopranos who would sing maybe a trovatore, maybe Norma, to the extent that Norma was performed in those years, and who didn't really venture much or at all above the high C. Pansel.
There's plenty of them today, too.
Well, sure. But I think it seems to me that was more or less a generalization that you could make about big-voiced sopranos earlier. And then there were much lighter-voiced sopranos who we sometimes call coloraturas, who would go on and sing the C sharp, the D, the E flat, maybe the E natural, and F. And then came this unusual phenomenon of Maria Callas, who had been trained by one of those very high sopranos and managed to get her very big voice to go on up to those notes. And since then, most notably JOAN SUTHERLAND, but a handful of others as well, there have been big voice sopranos singing above high C where they didn't used to be. And my question is this something that is an unusual feature that comes along in one voice out of many, or is it a matter of something that should be attempted with in training a soprano voice of that color?
Well, I think every voice, no matter whether it's big, small, or medium, should learn to sing coloratura and fioritura.
But I'm talking about the high notes, not
the high
the
notes.
coloratura. The high notes, the notes above high C for a big soprano voice.
Oh, I think that they should be absolutely sought in the studio. I mean, one should really try to extend the voice as far as it'll go. Absolutely.
But don't use it until it's secured, for goodness sake.
The question is how
secure
much
is
do
it?
you sing in public?
Mm-hmm.
How free do you get in public?
How high did you extend yours in the studio?
E flat, E natural above the staff.
And what's the highest that you sustained in public?
C. I maybe touched a D flat once in a while, but no.
I once shrieked an F sharp. I was very cross.
I can tell you one thing though, when I vocalized and extended my voice up to those notes, I knew I'd been there. I could feel it right here.
And was that one of the things that suggested to you that you didn't want to make a home up in that range?
No, it was not that. Not in that register, no, up there. It had to do with around E, F sharp, G, around that area of the passage.
We're talking about right at the top of the treble staff,
right,
which is often, it's sort of a place where the voice changes in its responsiveness, and so we call it a passaggio.
Sustaining that register was the one that told the tale for me.
In other words, you found that you obviously had those notes and could sing them well, but you found it difficult to sustain
it over
too much
the course of an evening. We have to judge by opera. That's the thing we have to judge by, because that's the thing that takes the great stamina and sustaining over the course of an evening.
Well, I had great problems sustaining a certain aria. What was it? With plaintive notes, an amorous moan. My husband was transposing at a concert because it was in a rather low key for me, and he was transposing, and right in the middle, suddenly I felt, I've got to wind my voice up. Why is it so difficult tonight? And in his transposition, he'd gone up a fifth instead. And I was singing up, thinking, why is it so difficult? Try to next and sing all the notes, and there's something wrong. What happened? Did I go off the rails? It was usually me that went off the rails. And afterwards, a very sheepish husband came and said, I'm terribly sorry.
But that's also, sometimes singers get a fixation about certain notes, and sometimes the teacher really has to trick them into moving things up or moving things down or whatever, and putting them into a key that they're, obviously, we hope they don't have absolute pitch in this case, but to trick them and to make them absolutely realize that they can sing that note. There's just some kind of mental problem.
It's a mental hang-up. It was with me. I mean, I could sing around the house those notes, not if I started to stand by the piano and know what I'm singing. Go away from the piano, Richard would say, go away. And he'd sort of then transpose things up. And there you are, you see what you were singing? Because I did not have perfect pitch.
I remember once reading something that Kala said, that sometimes she said, you just have to think that high note an octave lower. And I thought, damn it, how did she figure that out? I figured that out myself.
No, you mustn't let the voice go. This is awful line. This, again, control. You cannot let the voice go too high. You cannot have the feeling of the voice being in too high an area too soon. Otherwise, you'll never make the acuity. You cannot also make the voice have the voice too low in the register, or you won't make the acuity. You have to really work on these passages and know exactly what position your voice is in. And some people, I'm sure, don't think about it. They get up there and the voice is really not solid in it's not solid in their mind how they're going to sing this.
By what position to sing a given note in or a given part of the range in? Do you mean simply having such control over the different ways that you might sing that note that you can choose the one that is advantageous and cultivate it?
No, I think it's really a matter of having worked on joining the registers, eradicating them if you like, and knowing that you have a complete line of the voice from the top to the bottom and back again.
Question, Joan.
Yeah.
Eradicating the registers, does that mean that in the beginning...
You can't eradicate.
You know where they are, though.
Exactly.
You certainly know where the registers are.
It's the mind again, dear.
Right.
The mind. It's controlling the break between the registers.
But we are saying that there are registers.
Of course there are.
Well, since we're saying that, let's say, when you say where they are, where are they? Where
Depends
does
on
the
the
chest
voice. It depends on the person.
I think Garcia really had it in his book. He really shows, that the register change between chest and head voice is around E natural, and he says, for a contralto, it's F is the chest voice, and he puts in parenthesis F sharp, but he moves it down as the voice is higher.
Yeah, he seems, though, all the variations are clustered very close to each other.
Very close,
right there,
within
around
two notes,
E, F, F.
2 half steps, so
Yes.
a step and a half.
Yes.
And then the other register break is up around E, F, F sharp, around there. So
I've heard it proposed that in small ways or large ways, the voice sort of changes in responsiveness about twice per octave.
I think around C sharp, treble C sharp, the voice is really starting to lift. And that's why famous singers like Pasta, Molly Brown, this is my opinion anyway, why they started to get big holes in their voices around A natural, middle voice, B flat, B natural. And they wrote, many people wrote that unfortunately she developed a big hole in her voice, dead notes, as it were, where the registers just weren't convening. And I think, I don't know what you think, Joan, about this, and you will, but I think that in the last century, beginning of this century, they really did not amalgamate those registers like we try to now. That's where I think we have come amazingly a step further. I think they really just banged into their chest voice. Just let it, let the break happen.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
Some for sure. I mean, the ideal was always held up of uniting them. But,
Right.
But as we know, sometimes when an ideal is preached most loudly is when most people are transgressing against it. So, yeah, I think that's probably true. But we do have several centuries of people saying E, F, F sharp. And with the migrations of pitch over time, I mean, that could move it a little bit as well.
But how often, for instance, do you hear a young man singing, and you can tell what's happening, say, on F sharp, whether this man is a tenor or not.
Yes.
It's almost always clear.
Yes.
Immediately.
Yes, and if you have someone who should be a tenor who is trying to remain a baritone, what happens is the voice just goes all wrong there, and he can seem like a baritone without high notes, when really he needs to be a tenor, because trying to sing the high notes in a baritone-ish way, they just won't go to the place that nature wants them.
And now what are we saying what happens? Then what happens on that F sharp that makes it change?
That makes it change for a tenor?
That makes the register change. What happens? Is it a lift in the back, the soft palate?
In other words, the characteristics of head voice are translated into the terms of the modern tenor, but the characteristics of head voice enter into the voice at that point and enable it to go on rising past that passage.
But has it been creeping in already, say, around D? C sharp, D, just barely creeping in.
I think in a way, every semitone is a new register in terms of you have to sort of lift it compared to the one before.
I agree.
Well, don't say that or you'll lose the line. You'll be thinking.
but then you have to make it not be
You have to
noticed.
iron it out again.
That's where portamento comes in.
Legato, dear legato.
How do you warm up the voice at the beginning of the singing day? And how much does that vary from one singer to another?
Well, I loathe singing in the morning, of course, and so I try to, if I have a choice, putting it later in the day. I start with getting this head voice going. That's for me. That's the thing to get my little boy soprano voice going. Starting around E flat, E natural, and just start going. All that just for a few minutes. And then I'll do a series of exercises.
Well, Jackie, we're quite at opposite ends of the whatnot here.
Really?
Yes, I love singing in the morning. And
I'd you like to get up in the morning too, and I don't.
Anyway, I also never sang exercises at the top of the higher part of the voice. I used to sing in the middle of the voice. And I used to have one little exercise that I used to do from about A to, I would say A to C. And
A down to mid C?
No, up.
A up to C.
Yes, A to C. And it just was very, very simple. And if I breathed correctly, projected the sound correctly, about 2 times through that little exercise, that was all the warming up I ever did. And it was all the warming up I ever did before a performance. And yet I've heard some of my colleagues singing their heart out, screaming out their top notes. And I thought, save it, dear, save it. Don't use that before you get on stage.
How long was this little exercise, and do you have a copy?
I forget now which book it was from, whether it was Raphael or Conconi, I really can't remember. But it was, dear. It went on, but
So a little arietta sort of.
that's about what it was. But that was it. I used to sing it better than that.
I think that perhaps my trying to bring this head voice always in immediately is because by nature I have this big chest resonator going on here. And so if I don't get those things properly balanced in the beginning, the chest resonance can take over.
So you start by making sure that you have that light head voice,
Right.
what you call the little
Right.
low voice.
Right.
And then what do you do? Do you go through different parts of your range or different vocal
Oh, I
beats,
certainly go
or-
down into, I mean, I take that down, maybe to as low as, easily to a low E, below low C. I'd be below middle C.
Staying in the tiny voice. Staying in that.
Staying lightly, but already, going down there and exercising, then coming back up. But I'm somewhere in the middle with Joan. I mean, some people vocalize themselves to death. I vocalize a bit. After I get my voice
Oh,
together.
I maybe sang a few scales, just simple, octave scales.
But I certainly, I've sometimes gone through the 20 exercises of Rossini in his Gorgheggi e Solfeggi. It says in the book to do them 3 times. Please, I mean, once is enough.
Always on ah or on a variety of vowels?
On ah, but occasionally if I feel like my voice is unwieldy in a certain area, and let's say that's probably around A and B flat and B natural in the middle of the voice, I will switch to an E and say, and then I'll go back and forth between the E and the A and maybe an O, and maybe if I'm a little higher around the D and the E flat and the E, I might go to an oo to try to feel it a little bit better, and switch back and forth till I feel like the ah is totally under control from top to bottom.
And how about you?
Oh, I could do a bit of meeing and yes, I could use the E vowel, but I really did very, very little. I was very lucky because the voice was usually in reasonably good shape. At Covent Garden, rehearsals began at 10:30 in the morning, punct, and you had to be ready. And so you had to get up at home and get there. So for 7 years, I was there when rehearsals were beginning. So one had to do it, but I enjoyed singing. I never found it a problem.
I was always there. I'm not sure I was present.
Is there a reason that you can describe why ah is considered the sort of central vowel for vocal technique?
It's the warmest sound, I would say.
The
The warmest sound.
And I think it's the more balanced sound, that it has the, a bit of openness about it, and yet a bit of resonant, mask resonance that you can get it with it too. You can sing ah, ah, and you get the feeling of it here, yet you also feel a little bit of openness in the back.
And
I used to use the E sound for making the voice speak 1, 2, 3, 4, with the sort of a mi, me, ma, mo, mu sort of on one note.
I think we probably agree that if we have to really, we want to find exactly the perfect placement, we go to the E.
Yeah.
because the E gives focus?
It just puts it in the right place. Don't ask me why, but it just does.
No, it's giving it nice and keeping it nice and forward, whereas an R sound can go back. And so we also then you want to make sure that you are putting it in the right position. But well,
Sometimes I do also like a hum that goes into an E, a hum into
That's
an
right.
A hum into an ah, so that it was, and without breaking, of course, so that it places it.
And why is it that the hum makes that happen?
Well, it gets the good old mask going,
that's right.
Because if it isn't coming out of your mouth, then it's got to be resonating in the lungs.
You've got to have, that feeling of the forward placement. There's just no question about that.
What's
the
that? I've
surprise
heard people say
that
the
shown-
iniquitous forward production. I don't know how people can sing without a forward production myself. But there we are.
I agree.
Both of you have alluded to transposition, and in fact, both of you have practiced it when you've wanted to at different times in your careers. And I think many people still don't realize how much it used to be the case that opera singers, even within a thoroughly familiar opera, would choose to sing their arias a little higher or a little lower than
They
had
still
been written.
do.
Yes, but it seems to be much less. And
Things like Bohème.
yes, Bohème. It comes printed in the orchestra parts both ways.
Give tenors always get it easier.
This is right.
They
what
get
Marilyn
forgiven.
said.
They get forgiven.
The particular note of
bet.
high C, anytime it appears in a tenor aria, there is a transposed orchestra part available. But say a little more on this, because you have both transposed in various operas and
Well, we've transposed in Norma, but I mean the higher, goodness me, the higher, what am I saying? The higher key is, for me in the duet, Marilyn, it has a much warmer sound in the lower key. It's
Well-
much more quality in the
Did we not sing it in the higher key when the first time
to start
we did
with.
it?
We did.
Yes,
And,
that's what I
and it
thought.
came down quick
Then
smart.
it came down. But I think there are historical records that also, not records that you listen to, records that you read,
Read, yeah.
that it was already put down in the early performances.
That's
Is that
right.
not correct, Manuel?
that's absolutely correct. But moreover, in the basement at Covent Garden, if you look at the old orchestra parts from like the 1880s, every aria in Traviata is there in 2 or 3 or in some cases 4 keys. I mean, it's you can have Di Provenza in D flat major or C major or B major. De me volenti spiriti in D or E flat or E natural. I mean, this was absolutely.
I remember
routine.
reading, for instance, that in La Favorita, when, oh, come on, getting old, the first out of
Join the club.
Grisi. When Grisi sang Favorita, which is basically considered a mezzo role, but it's on the high side, she transposed the famous aria up. And there were absolutely, proof that she put it up a step.
There were transpositions in both directions constantly.
But is there some sort of connotation that if you transpose it up, it shows that you're even more invincible, but if you put it down, you got trumpets?
Oh. Let it sit where the voice sings it best, anyway. What's the difference? Better you should have a transposition than have someone struggling up on the stage to sing it in whatever key.
I think we're in the minority on this, though.
Me?
Well, all of us. I think we're.
Oh, I think
we
we
are
are.
in the minority. I think there would be insistences from, especially conductors, that it has to stay in the key that's printed.
Oh, that's true too.
The first key that's printed.
But I mean, if you happen to have a cast where someone really is having problems, well, surely it's better to transpose than send someone on scared to death and probably not do very well.
Do you advise sometimes the young singers who come to you in master classes that they ought to transpose an aria to another key?
No, they shouldn't sing the aria if they can't. They're young.
Well, aren't you contradicting yourself?
No, not if they're still at the stage where they're studying and coming to master classes.
I see. So they should sing only those arias that they can sing in the original
I'm
key.
sure they should, so that they know whether or not they can sing the whole role. Some of them sing arias that are really beyond them, but how they'd ever sing the whole role, I don't know.
And how about you?
I think I agree with Joan that in the formative years, you should definitely
Must.
try to do it as written. How else are you ever going to
How are you going to know what you can
know
do?
what you're going to do?
As opposed to art songs.
That's different. That's a whole other bag. That's, first of all, they come printed in 3 or 4
That's
keys,
right.
most of them. So, maybe sometime you'll want it right in the cracks. I've done that too.
You know the story about Shel Yapin and Gerald Moore.
Which, well, I know some good Gerald Moore stories. I don't know this one.
Gerald Moore accompanying Shalyapin, and they do the song in one key and it's too high, and then they do another and it's too low, and Moore points to D and E flat on the piano as being the two keys he's played in, and Shalyapin says, "I've nothing in between."
I know the great stories about him with the great English contralto Clara Butt, who said that finally she wanted everything put up a step so that she could sing it down an octave. And then there was another woman that he played for that he said that she never quite knew what key she wanted to sing in, but she knew she absolutely did not want to sing in the original.
You can't, I don't even approve of myself doing so-called masterclasses, because you work with someone for half an hour or whatever it is, and you may give them ideas and then go away and leave them. I mean, that's not the way to work. If you're going to teach, you have to be there all the time. I've had over 40, whatever it was, years of always towing the line, saying, as I said to Moffat, Oxenbould, and Australian Opera, I felt like school never got out. And I don't want to tie myself down anymore. I sometimes think I should, but I don't want to do that. I'm past 70 and that's enough. I don't know what I'll be good at it anyway.
But you have begun to do it more, and how do you find, what are the differences in doing it that way? Have you surprised yourself, or is it pretty much what you expected?
Actually, I have to say that I am really surprised by the whole teaching thing, because I never really had thought that I would go into teaching. I just thought, that's another thing, and then when I stop singing, I'll stop singing. But teaching is something that has just sort of gradually come to me, and I have to say that I really enjoy it. I don't know that I want to do it, like some of you out there do it, 12 hours a day.
No, I couldn't do it.
Whoa, that's really hard work, my friends. And my hat's off to all of you, because it takes a tremendous sapping of your strength. But I feel like it's almost a wonderful gift that's been given to me in my old age, that I can work with young people and get some results and feel very good about it. But again, I agree with Joan. When you've done it for as long as we have, you really need a little peace, not eternal peace.
No, I mean, what I've done, I've enjoyed, and it's been interesting to see the results that some of the young people have come up with. Perhaps when you've got longer than just a half an hour, if you've got sort of 5 or 6 days to hear the pupils over about 5 times in 5 half hours or something, and then see how they come up in a concert at the end of it. And it's interesting and well, it's rewarding in many ways. But I certainly don't. I don't want to tie myself down to that. I really feel I've had enough. I like to listen to them, and I like to dabble, but I certainly don't want to, as Jackie says, hang up my shingle.
Last question, because we're supposed to get this wound up shortly. In the years that you sang so often together, I wonder what, if anything, each of you learned from the other.
Wow. Well, I mean, I think it was just a great combination. I mean, it was terrific.
I've always said that, and I'm ashamed to say it, but we never really had to do any work to be able to sing together. It just happened. We got together, and the vocal intention as well as the musical and expression intentions were the same, and we just started swinging on the same wavelength. And I think the big thing was trying to listen for each other on
listen
stage.
for each other.
Absolutely, to listen. And, occasionally we gave a signal or so on stage like that, which means I'm out of breath. How about you?
Jackie said, I must say, how about you? Some of the young people have got up and sung in these classes or in competition, and they have been determined to take long breaths, which they really couldn't sustain. And it is always better, do you not agree, to take a breath, to top up a breath, than to really get to the end of a phrase and be, practically purple in the face because your breath's running out.
Oh, I agree.
I mean, it's sometimes there are markings in arias or songs, and I think that is one of the things that you have to work out for yourself, where you can take an obtrusive breath, something that's not going to break up the line of the piece, but it is so much better to take a breath than let the breath collapse because you just can't manage to sustain the phrase.
Well, there's the famous quote from Lehmann, Lotte Lehmann, of course, that no one should sacrifice himself on the altar of breath.
And after all, if you really let the breath run out, then something's going to start to get tense, and then you're practicing singing wrong.
Right. So now we have to
take the breath and sing all the breath.
Full circle. We started out by saying breath is everything, but it is. It's knowing also the right amount and when you need a new one and when not to get red in the face.
So I think about with Jackie and I, it's just been a wonderful association. I don't know that. I think we each sparked the other off. There was that excitement, enthusiasm, exhilaration.
And I think
abandon.
I hope you'll believe this. Joan and I have never had a crossword with each other. On or off. Thank you, Joan, from the bottom of my heart. Thank you, Will. I mean, this has just been great fun. Thank you all for coming. And thank you, Juilliard, for joining with the Marilyn Horne Foundation, making this possible.